Mr. Darcy had not meant to return to Hertfordshire. He had told himself so repeatedly on the road from London, and again when the towers of Netherfield first rose through a curtain of winter rain. He had no business there. Bingley had quitted the place. Miss Bennet was in town. The neighbourhood, with all its easy impertinence and all its dangerous attractions, ought by every principle of good sense to have been left exactly where he had abandoned it. Yet good sense had not preserved him from remembering Elizabeth Bennet. The fault, he told himself, was not in memory but in the violence with which memory had taken command. He had recalled her eyes, those fine dark eyes that had looked upon him with more challenge than deference, in the midst of a dinner in Grosvenor Square. Her laugh, low and unguarded and wholly indifferent to his consequence, while his steward spoke of repairs to a tenant cottage. Her walk across a muddy lane, the hem of her petticoat bearing 6 inches of soil, her cheeks flushed with the keen air, when Georgiana had played, with more obedience than feeling, through an Italian air. He remembered, with a precision that tormented him, the scent of her, something warm and unpretentious, like sun-dried linen and the wild roses that grew along the Pemberley hedgerows, a scent he had no right to carry with him yet could not seem to surrender. The more he condemned his own weakness, the more lively the image became. She was not handsome enough to tempt him, he had said so, and because he had said it, and had been a fool, the words had grown monstrous in recollection. They now returned to him with all the cruelty of truth badly spoken. It was not only attraction that had brought him back. Had it been only that, pride might have prevailed. He had resisted softer impulses before. He had been bred to mastery of himself, if not always to mastery of his opinions. No, he had returned because Mr. Wickham had reappeared in correspondence. The letter lay folded in the inner pocket of his coat, where its presence seemed to burn through the cloth. It had come from a man formerly connected with the militia, a gentleman not intimate enough to be called a friend, and not foolish enough to be ignored. The report was imprecise, as such reports often were, but its substance was plain. Wickham had been seen too frequently with officers bound for Meryton, and had spoken with too much familiarity of a family of 5 daughters, one of whom had, he claimed, understood him when others did not. Darcy had read the phrase 3 times, one of whom. It might mean any of them. He told himself it might mean the youngest, who had admired every red coat with equal enthusiasm. It might mean one of the silly sisters whose names he had never properly attached to their faces. It might even mean nothing at all, for Wickham's talent for suggesting a conquest where none existed had survived years of disappointment. But Darcy had thought of Elizabeth. The thought had been enough. The memory of her hand, briefly his during a dance at Netherfield, how her fingers had rested against his palm with a lightness that had unsettled him for days afterward, how the warmth of her touch had seemed to linger long after the music ended. He had not held a woman's hand since without feeling the comparison. His carriage had passed through Meryton in the late afternoon, the rain silvering the shop windows and driving most decent people indoors. He had not stopped. It would have been improper to call at Longbourn without purpose. It would have been worse to hover in the neighbourhood like a man unable to command himself. He had gone directly to Netherfield, entered a house grown chill through neglect, and written 3 letters before the fire had properly caught. One to his steward at Pemberley, one to his solicitor, one to Colonel Fitzwilliam. The last was the shortest and the most difficult. I may require your presence sooner than expected. Matters concerning Wickham and Hertfordshire have become less simple than I had hoped. If I am wrong, you may laugh at me. If I am right, I shall need a friend who remembers Ramsgate clearly and can speak when I cannot. He had sanded the page before considering the danger of that sentence. Ramsgate, Georgiana, her misery, his own shame, Wickham's smile when discovered. A man might lock a door upon such recollections, but he could not lock them away from the consequences they had bred. Darcy rose from the desk and crossed to the window. Netherfield's lawns lay in a wet, dark sweep beyond the glass. He had danced with Elizabeth in that house. He had stood close enough to count the stray curls at her temple, close enough to feel the faint warmth that rose from her skin when she turned toward him in conversation. He had watched her there, judged her family there, condemned her connections there, and fallen, though he had not admitted the word then, there. To return now with nothing but warning would be to invite disbelief. What could he say? Miss Elizabeth, the man whose conversation you appear to have favored is dangerous. Miss Elizabeth, believe me against the officer whose injuries I have refused to explain. Miss Elizabeth, I separated Bingley from your sister because I trusted my judgment more than another woman's heart. No, every truth he possessed would sound like arrogance until he had earned the right to speak it. Every warning would appear jealousy, every caution an insult. There remained one course, both honorable and decisive. It was, perhaps, too decisive. Darcy knew it even as the idea took form. A proposal would not be a warning. A proposal would be a declaration of esteem, intention, protection, alliance. It would place Elizabeth beyond Wickham's reach, silence any idle expectation of the officers, and restore Bingley to the neighbourhood under circumstances Darcy could no longer manage from concealment. It would also expose him to the judgment of a woman who had every reason to think ill of him. He almost smiled. Elizabeth Bennet's judgment was no small adversary. He had meant once to leave her untouched by his world. He had told himself that her family, her connections, her want of fortune, and the impropriety of some of her relations made the match impossible. He had congratulated himself upon prudence while thinking of her every hour, while lying awake in his London bed, recalling the way she had looked up at him beneath her bonnet that last morning at Netherfield, her mouth curved in something between amusement and defiance, her eyes holding his a moment longer than courtesy required. He had despised the weakness of desiring what he had determined to refuse. Now he was in Hertfordshire, and prudence had altered its shape. A servant entered to ask whether he wished dinner served. No, Darcy said. Not yet. The man bowed and withdrew. Darcy returned to the desk, drew a fresh sheet toward him, and wrote Mr. Bennet's name at the top of a note he did not complete. A written request would be too cold. A visit would be better. A gentleman applied to a father in person. There would be no ambiguity, no rumour, no opportunity for Wickham to turn a lady's hesitation into sport. Still his hand remained suspended over the page. What if Elizabeth refused? The possibility struck with a force he found both humiliating and clarifying. He had considered settlements, objections, propriety, family opposition, Bingley, Georgiana, Wickham. He had not sufficiently considered that the lady herself might reject him with the same spirited certainty with which she had rejected every false compliment he had ever attempted in conversation. If she refused, he would have no right to complain. If she accepted from pressure alone, he would have no right to be pleased. If she accepted, it must be because she had chosen him with her eyes open, not because Longbourn, her mother, or his own urgency had made refusal seem ungrateful. The distinction unsettled him. Darcy folded the blank sheet and set it aside. There was time enough, he told himself, to ensure the offer was made with honour. He would speak to Mr. Bennet. He would request permission. He would then speak to Elizabeth. She would have the choice. A choice made beneath a father's approval and a mother's hopes was still a choice, was it not? The question did not answer itself. Outside, the rain thickened. Inside, the fire caught at last and filled the room with a wavering light. Darcy stood before it until the edge of the letter in his pocket bent beneath his hand. By morning he had resolved to go to Longbourn. By afternoon, the whole course of Elizabeth Bennet's life would begin moving.